And Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his own country and among his own kin and in his own house." And he could do no mighty work there. And he marveled because of their unbelief. I've always been fascinated by this story about the rejection Jesus received in his own hometown. All three Gospels tell us about it. Here in Mark and also in Matthew, it ends with the statement, "And he could do no mighty work there among them." In Luke's version, the people got so angry that they wanted to kill him, tried to. And what's fascinating to me is that Jesus, the Son of the living God, the one who could calm the storm and raise Lazarus from the dead, that Jesus, couldn't do much of anything in terms of miracles in his own hometown because there was no supernatural faith. Why? Why is that? It's because of their overfamiliarity. The people of Nazareth were over-familiar. They were overly familiar with Jesus. They had known him as a child. They'd seen him play in the streets. They knew supposedly his brothers and sisters. And they thought they knew him. Is not this Joseph's son? Is not this the carpenter's son? And for that reason, they had a one-dimensional view of Jesus. And they saw him only in worldly terms. And they were never able to see it any differently, with eyes of faith. And the most astounding thing of all is that he could do no mighty work there. He could do no mighty work there. See, there's a connection between their faith and his mighty works. Now compare that to the response Jesus received in Capernaum. Earlier in Mark, we hear the story about how Jesus visited another synagogue, the synagogue at Capernaum. And nobody knew him there. And Mark tells us that they were astonished by what he taught and what he did. And the first thing that happened there, when he walked in, immediately it says, a man possessed with a demon approached him. And he called out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us?" Well, actually, the answer is yes. And he said, "I know who you are, the Holy One of God." I know who you are, the Holy One of God. See, even the demoniac at Capernaum knew who Jesus was. They knew his identity. And the people of Nazareth did not. And later that day, Mark tells us that around sunset, they brought people afflicted with various diseases, and he healed them out, and he drove out many demons. And the demons also came out, Mark says, crying, "You are the Son of God." So isn't that interesting? See the difference? See the difference there? To the people in his hometown of Nazareth, Jesus was the son of Joseph. But to the people in Capernaum, and even the demons there, he was the Son of God. And that was the difference. That made all the difference in the world in their experience of Jesus. And that was the difference between whether or not he could do miracles in their midst. And as it was then, so it is now. As it was for them, so it is for us. So how about you? Who do you say Jesus is? Son of God or son of Joseph? See, we all have the same problem that the people of Nazareth had. We're all too familiar. with Jesus. We've heard about him all our lives. From the time we were little children, we heard the stories about Jesus. We know all the stories, and we're in danger of being too familiar with him and becoming complacent and blasé about how astonishing he is, how miraculous he is, how incredible the ministry of the church is. And we need to see Jesus with fresh eyes, eyes of faith. And I want to suggest this morning that a very powerful way to do that is by meditating on the beauty of his church, the church he gave us, which is, after all, his body. It's easy for us to forget. And do you realize how unique, how important, how beautiful the Catholic Church is? Do you realize how beautiful our faith is? You know, we get caught up in the day-to-day life, the day-to-day struggle of family life, and we focus down at my wife likes to say that sometimes she feels like she's chained on the beach and she's forced to focus on individual grains of sand instead of looking up into heaven. And that's often how we are, and that's often our experience. We lose sight of the bigger picture. But the truth is the Catholic Church has always been a shining light in the darkness of a very pagan and troubled world. And I want to give you only 3 examples. There are many, many more. But I'll just give you 3. Just to prime the pump and get us started. Go home and meditate. Go home, think about it. Study all you can about the church and how amazing it is. The first one I want to point out, I mentioned once before. The first Christians, the same ones that were getting thrown to the lions and strapped on and became human torches, those first Christians did not convert pagan Rome with a sword of steel, but with a sword of the Spirit. They converted pagan Rome with virtue. They converted Rome with humility, with courage, and with the beauty of their holiness. And they converted it with their care for one another and care for the weak. See, that's the difference between the Catholic Church, the Christian Church, and paganism. I've mentioned it before, but infanticide was common in ancient Rome. Infanticide and abortion. Parents abandoned an unwanted infant in a field or under a bridge, and it was usually a girl or a disabled child. And it was the Christians who Nero was doing his best to demonize. It was the Christians who went out in the night, because that's the only time they could safely travel, and they rescued those abandoned children, and they brought them home. And they gave them a home, and they taught them the faith, and they raised them as Christians. Abortion was already known and rejected by Christians in the first century. The Didache mentions it. It's an early catechism. It mentions abortion and prohibits it. So in a brutal and violent world, Christians were the first pro-lifers. And if you hadn't thought about that before, think about that. The pro-life movement did not start in 1973. It started in 1933. And that's part of the beautiful legacy of the Catholic faith. That's part of the miracle of the Catholic faith that Jesus gave us. That's the first thing. Second thing I want to point out to you is, did you know that the Catholic Church was the first institution that taught the world that women can be strong and competent leaders? It was in Catholic culture for the first time that women had a respectable alternative to marriage. And the church produced the likes of St. Hildegard and St. Catherine of Siena and St. Teresa of Avila, all strong, brilliant women who are all doctors of the church. And there's so many others. So many others. That too is part of the beautiful legacy of the church. And the last thing I want to point out is that it was the Catholic Church that created the conditions for the abolition of slavery. Slavery was universal in the ancient world, and it was first abolished in Christian lands. In fact, think about this. The very idea of human rights, that the individual has rights, is a Catholic idea. It's based on the image of God, that we're the image of God. And that's an inconvenient fact that critical race theory of our day is designed to hide. But in fact, where slavery still exists today, and it does still exist, shockingly, it does still exist. It exists in non-Christian cultures. And don't forget that the Catholic Church invented the university, and it invented the hospital. I think that there's never been an institution in the world that has so successfully or so long civilized, educated, and sanctified humanity as the Catholic Church. And for that, we can be proud. For that, that's the miracle of the Catholic Church. To paraphrase G.K. Chesterton, who said, slightly paraphrasing, the Catholic Church is the only thing in the world which saves a man from the degrading slavery of being a product of his own historical era. See, the Catholic Church is the only institution in the world that lifts us up out of slavery to the world. And he's right. And that's part of the beautiful legacy of the Catholic Church. So, in conclusion, today we heard the story of Jesus and how he was rejected by his own people, his own family in Nazareth. And they did it because they were too familiar with him. They stopped being astonished by him. They thought they'd known him. They knew all about him. And they were unable to see him with anything but worldly eyes. They had no supernatural faith. And amazingly, he could do no miracles among them. This morning, I'm suggesting that many of us struggle with the same problem. It's part of the problem with the modern church. We take Jesus for granted. He's too familiar. We've known him all our lives. We've heard all the stories. We're no longer astonished by him. We need to reclaim our astonishment and wonder at Jesus Christ. He is astonishing. And we can see this when we meditate on the beauty of the church that he created. I've given you a few examples, but there are many, many more. I encourage you to go home and look them up. In a few minutes, we will begin the Eucharist. I'm going to pray the Eucharistic prayer. And you've heard it all 100 times, right? You've heard it 100 times. But let's not let that familiarity blind us to how astonishing it really is. Because in that prayer, Jesus claims to really be here with us today. Really present in the Blessed Sacrament. He says, "This is my body. This is my blood." And this is astonishing, and this is beautiful, and this is miraculous. And this is God's great gift to us. So as we approach the altar this morning to receive communion, pray for the gift of God's grace to receive it with supernatural eyes, with the astonishment that it deserves. Pray for faith. Pray for eyes to see that Jesus is truly present here with us today. And it's not Jesus, the son of Joseph. It's Jesus, the Son of God. And he wants to come into your heart and do a mighty work there. Will you let him in? Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.